When I saw 255 missed calls from the husband who abandoned me 4 days after our wedding, I knew he'd finally figured out who I really was, but by then, it was already too late. What Ethan didn't know when he left me stranded in that cafe in downtown Millbrook with nothing but a goodbye note and my wedding ring sitting next to a cold cup of coffee, was that the struggling art teacher he'd married was actually Vivienne Ashford, heir to the Ashford Media Empire, and I'd just decided to destroy his entire world. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was sitting in Rosie's corner Café, the little place where Ethan and I had our first date 9 months ago, staring at the note he'd left on our kitchen table before disappearing into the night. Vivienne, it read in his careful handwriting, I made a mistake. This isn't what I want. I'm sorry. That was it. No explanation, no conversation, no chance to understand what had gone wrong between Saturday night when he'd whispered how much he loved me, and Monday morning when he'd packed his bags and vanished. I'd been sitting there for 3 hours, replaying every moment of our 4-day marriage, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. The wedding had been perfect, small and intimate at the Willowbrook Gardens, just our closest friends and family. Ethan had looked at me like I was the only person in the world when I walked down the aisle. He'd cried during his vows. He'd danced with me until midnight, spinning me around the dance floor while promising me forever, but forever, apparently, lasted exactly 96 hours. If you like the story of our channel, please like the channel, and if you are interested in these stories, join our channel membership. Thank you. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I sat down, but I'd been ignoring it. I assumed it was my sister Cordelia calling to check on me, or maybe my best friend Natasha wanting to know why I wasn't at work. I taught 3rd grade at Maplewood Elementary, and missing a day without notice wasn't like me. But I couldn't face anyone yet. I couldn't face the questions, the sympathy, the humiliation of having to explain that my brand new husband had decided I wasn't worth staying married to. It wasn't until the elderly woman at the next table leaned over and said, "Honey, your phone's been ringing for the past hour. Maybe you should answer it?" That I finally looked at the screen. 255 missed calls. All from Ethan. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the call log. The calls had started at 6:47 a.m. and hadn't stopped. Every few minutes, sometimes every few seconds, his name appeared on my screen. Mixed between the calls were dozens of text messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Vivienne, please pick up. I need to talk to you. I made a terrible mistake. Please, just answer the phone. I know who you are now." That last message made my blood run cold. I know who you are now. For 9 months, I'd been living a carefully constructed lie. When I met Ethan at a local gallery opening, I'd introduced myself as Vivienne Montgomery, elementary school teacher and weekend artist. I'd rented a modest apartment in the suburbs, driven a 10-year-old Toyota, and lived off what I could realistically earn on a teacher's salary. I'd wanted, just once in my life, to be loved for who I was as a person, not for what my family's money could provide. You see, what Ethan didn't know, what nobody in Millbrook knew, was that I was Vivienne Ashford, the only child of media mogul Harrison Ashford. The Ashford Media Empire owned 17 television stations, 43 radio stations, and 8 major newspapers across the country. When my father had his heart attack 2 years ago, I'd quietly taken over operations, running a $1 billion company from behind the scenes while maintaining my cover as a small-town teacher. I'd been groomed for this responsibility my entire life. While other kids were playing with dolls, I was sitting in boardrooms learning about market shares and advertising revenue. By 16, I could read a financial statement better than most MBA graduates. By 25, I was secretly making decisions. That affected thousands of employees and millions of viewers across the nation, but I'd never been loved. Not really. Every relationship I'd ever had was tainted by money, guys who wanted access to my family's wealth, or who were intimidated by my power. So when I turned 28, I decided to try something different. I created Vivienne Montgomery, gave her a modest background and a simple life, and went looking for someone who could love her. I thought I'd found that in Ethan. Ethan Reeves was a freelance photographer who specialized in local events and small business marketing. He was talented, charming, and refreshingly normal. He worried about paying his rent, got excited about landing a new client, and talked about his dreams of opening his own studio someday. When he looked at me, he saw a kind teacher who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends and painted watercolors in her spare time. He had no idea that the woman he'd fallen in love with could buy and sell his entire world without blinking, but now, apparently, he'd figured it out. My phone buzzed again. Call number 256. This time, I answered. Vivienne, thank God. His voice was frantic, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. It's too late, Ethan, I said quietly, and hung up, because it was too late. The moment he'd walked out on Vivienne Montgomery, he'd signed his own death warrant. He just didn't know it yet. What he was about to learn was that Vivienne Ashford didn't just inherit money, she inherited power. And she was about to use every bit of it to make sure he regretted the day he ever thought he could discard her like yesterday's newspaper. The war was about to begin, and Ethan had no idea he'd already lost. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. 9 months earlier, I was standing in the back corner of the Riverside Gallery in downtown Millbrook, nursing a glass of cheap wine and wondering why I'd thought attending a local art show would be a good way to blend into small-town life. The gallery was cramped, filled with amateur landscape paintings and pottery that looked like it had been made in someone's garage. I was about to leave when I heard a voice behind me. The lighting in this piece is incredible, isn't it? I turned to find a man with warm brown eyes and slightly messy dark hair, holding a professional camera and studying the painting I'd been pretending to admire. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, with the kind of easy confidence that came from being comfortable in his own skin. The way the artist captured the sunset over Willowbrook Lake, he continued, stepping closer to the canvas. You can almost feel the warmth on your face. I looked at the painting again, a somewhat clumsy attempt at an evening landscape, and tried to see what he was seeing. The colors are vibrant, I managed, not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings by pointing out the obvious technical flaws. He laughed, a genuine sound that made something flutter in my chest. You're being polite. It's okay, I know it's not exactly museum quality. But that's my aunt who painted it, and she's 73 and just started taking art classes at the community center. The technique might not be perfect, but the joy she felt painting it? That's real. Something about the way he said it, the genuine affection in his voice, made me look at the painting differently. Suddenly I could see past the imperfect brushstrokes to the enthusiasm behind them, the love of someone discovering creativity later in life. I'm Ethan, he said, extending his hand. Ethan Reeves. I'm the photographer for tonight's show. Vivienne, I replied, taking his hand and feeling a little jolt at the contact. Vivienne Montgomery. The lie came so easily now. I'd been Vivienne Montgomery for 3 months, ever since I'd moved to Millbrook and taken the teaching job at Maplewood Elementary. The carefully constructed identity felt more natural than my real name sometimes. Are you an artist yourself? Ethan asked, gesturing toward the paintings around us. Just a hobby, I said, which was technically true. I did paint watercolors in my spare time, though my spare time was limited by secretly running a media empire. I'm actually a teacher. 3rd grade. His face lit up. Really? That's amazing. I have so much respect for teachers. My mom was a kindergarten teacher for 30 years. She always said it was the hardest and most rewarding job in the world. We talked for 2 hours. About teaching, about art, about his photography business that he was trying to build from the ground up. He told me about growing up in Millbrook. About his dreams of opening his own studio, about the way he saw beauty in everyday moments that other people missed. I specialize in local events, he explained as we walked out of the gallery together. Weddings, business openings, family portraits. It's not glamorous, but I love capturing those moments that matter to people. The look in a bride's eyes when she sees her dress for the first time, the pride on a business owner's face at their grand opening ribbon cutting. He talked with such passion about his work, such genuine enthusiasm for celebrating other people's joy, that I found myself captivated. When was the last time someone had talked to me about their dreams without first calculating what I could do for their career? Would you like to get coffee sometime? He asked as we reached my car, the modest Toyota I'd bought specifically for my Vivienne Montgomery persona. I know a great little place that makes the best cinnamon rolls you've ever tasted. I said yes before I could overthink it. Our first date was at Rosie's Corner Café, the same place where I would sit 9 months later reading his goodbye note. But that day, it was magical. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early with a single sunflower. He'd picked from his landlord's garden, sheepishly admitting he'd asked permission first. I know it's not a fancy rose, he said, but sunflowers are my favorite. They always turn toward the light, no matter what else is happening around them. He was everything I'd never experienced in a relationship. Thoughtful without being calculating. Ambitious without being ruthless. Kind without wanting something in return. When he talked about his future, it was about building something meaningful, not about accumulating wealth or power. I want to document life, he told me over those famous cinnamon rolls. Real life. The moments that make us human. A grandfather teaching his grandson to fish. A mother dancing in the kitchen while making dinner. Those tiny, perfect moments that people forget to notice. I fell for him completely. For his genuine smile, his terrible jokes, his habit of stopping mid-conversation to photograph interesting shadows on buildings. He treated me like I was precious, but not fragile. Interesting, but not intimidating. Beautiful, but not just something to be admired. Most importantly, he treated me like Vivienne Montgomery, a woman worth loving just as she was. For 6 blissful months, I lived in his world. We had picnic dates in Millbrook Park, where he'd photograph the sunset while I graded papers. We attended local festivals where he'd work and I'd wander through craft booths, buying handmade jewelry I'd never wear to board meetings. We spent quiet evenings in my modest apartment, cooking dinner together and watching old movies. He never questioned why I seemed to have more free time than most teachers, or why I never worried about money despite my supposedly modest salary. He never pushed when I deflected questions about my family, accepting my vague explanations about being estranged from my parents. He never seemed suspicious when I'd disappear for professional development conferences that were actually emergency board meetings. Ethan saw what I wanted him to see, a sweet, uncomplicated woman who taught children and painted flowers and found joy in simple pleasures, and I let myself believe that this version of me, this carefully crafted lie, was someone he could love forever. I should have known that forever built on deception was destined to crumble. But I was so hungry for authentic love, so desperate to be chosen for who I was rather than what I could provide, that I convinced myself the foundation didn't matter as long as the feelings were real. His feelings were real. Mine were real, but I wasn't real, and eventually, that would destroy everything. What Ethan never understood, what he could never have imagined as he photographed children's birthday parties and small business grand openings, was that the woman Grading third-grade math tests beside him was simultaneously making decisions that affected millions of people across the country. While he worried about whether he could afford to upgrade his camera equipment, I was approving budgets that exceeded the GDP of small nations. The Ashford Media Empire wasn't just wealthy, it was influential in ways that shaped public opinion, political discourse, and cultural trends. When our morning news programs decided to focus on a story, it became national conversation within hours. When our entertainment divisions greenlit a project, careers were made or destroyed. When our newspapers endorsed a candidate, elections shifted, and I controlled all of it. My grandfather, Theodore Ashford, had built the company from nothing starting in 1947 with a single radio station in Detroit. By the time my father Harrison inherited it in 1978, we owned media outlets in 12 states. When my father had his massive heart attack during a board meeting 2 years ago, I was 26 years old with an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of grooming for this exact moment. The transition was seamless because it had to be. In the media world, any sign of weakness or instability can tank stock prices and send advertisers fleeing to competitors. While my father lay in intensive care fighting for his life, I was in emergency meetings with our chief executives, ensuring that every decision, every strategy, every public statement flowed through me with the same authority it had always carried. The board members, mostly men in their 60s who had watched me grow up in conference rooms, initially resisted the idea of someone so young taking control. But I had something they didn't expect. I was better at this than my father had ever been. While he ruled through intimidation and old boy networks, I understood the digital landscape, social media dynamics, and the changing demographics of our audience. Within 6 months of taking over, I had increased our market share by 12%, acquired 3 struggling local newspapers for pennies on the dollar, and launched a digital news platform that was generating revenue faster than any of our traditional media outlets. The board stopped questioning my authority when the quarterly reports started showing record profits, but running a media empire from the shadows meant living a double life that would have exhausted most people. My days started at 4:30 a.m. with calls to our East Coast executives, followed by video conferences with our West Coast teams, then budget meetings, strategy sessions, and crisis management calls that could last until midnight. Between those responsibilities, I had to maintain my cover as Vivienne Montgomery, elementary school teacher. I became an expert at compartmentalization. In my Millbrook apartment, I had a separate phone for Ashford business that I told Ethan was for tutoring clients. My laptop had multiple encrypted partitions, one for lesson plans and student records, another for quarterly earnings reports and acquisition strategies. I kept 2 separate wardrobe, modest teacher clothes for my life with Ethan, power suits. For video calls with network executives, the most challenging part wasn't the logistics, it was the emotional toll of constantly hiding who I really was. Every conversation with Ethan felt like walking through a minefield. When he talked about his struggles to build his photography business, I had to bite my tongue instead of offering to introduce him to our advertising executives who could give him more work than he could handle in a lifetime. When he worried about paying rent, I couldn't reveal that I owned the building he lived in, along with 60% of downtown Millbrook's commercial real estate. "I wish I could give you the world," he told me one evening as we walked through Millbrook Park after a particularly difficult week where he'd lost a potential client to a larger photography firm. "You deserve so much more than what I can offer right now." "You are my world," I replied, meaning every word. "I don't need anything more than this." But even as I said it, I wondered what he would think if he knew that I could literally give him the world, or at least buy him a significant portion of it. Would he still love me if he knew that my modest teacher's salary was actually an allowance I paid myself from dividends that exceeded his annual income every month? The secrecy became more complicated as our relationship deepened. When Ethan mentioned wanting to expand his business, I secretly had my real estate division identify the perfect studio space for him and arrange for the rent to be mysteriously subsidized through a local business development grant that I created specifically for him. When he talked about his dream of having his work featured in a major publication, I had our lifestyle magazine commission a piece about emerging photographers in small-town America and made sure his work was prominently featured. He thought he was getting lucky. He thought his talent was finally being recognized. He had no idea that his girlfriend was orchestrating his success from behind the scenes. The guilt ate at me constantly. Was I helping him or manipulating him? Was I loving him or controlling him? Did it matter if the result was the same, his happiness and professional growth? I told myself I was protecting him from the complications that came with my real identity. I had seen what happened when people discovered who I really was. Suddenly, every interaction became transactional. Friendships turned into networking opportunities. Romance became strategy sessions disguised as dates. People stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource to be mined. But Ethan saw me. When I was exhausted from 16-hour days managing crises he couldn't imagine, he would massage my shoulders and tell me I worked too hard at school. When I was stressed about decisions that could affect thousands of jobs, he would make me chamomile tea and suggest we watch a mindless comedy to help me relax. When I felt overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility I couldn't share, he would hold me and promise that everything would be okay. He loved Vivienne Montgomery, the woman who existed only in Millbrook, only in our quiet moments together, only in the small space I had carved out between board meetings and budget reviews. She was the version of myself I had never been allowed to be, carefree, spontaneous, vulnerable, normal, but she was also a lie. And as our relationship grew more serious, as Ethan started talking about our future together, about marriage and children, and growing old in Millbrook, I began to realize that my carefully constructed double life had an expiration date. Eventually, he would discover the truth. Eventually, I would have to choose between the empire I had inherited and the life I had created. I thought I had more time. I thought I could figure out how to merge my two worlds, how to gradually introduce him to my real life in a way that wouldn't destroy what we had built together. I was wrong. The truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, in the most devastating way possible. And when it finally came to light, it wouldn't just end our relationship, it would turn the man I loved into someone I barely recognized, but I didn't know that yet. In those blissful months of living as Vivienne Montgomery, I actually believed I could have both, the love of a good man and the power of my birthright. I should have known that in my world, you never get to have both. The proposal came on a Thursday evening in October, exactly 8 months after we met at the Riverside Gallery. Ethan had been acting strange all week, nervous energy, secretive phone calls, and an unusual number of errands that took him away from our usual evening routines. I was starting to worry that he was having second thoughts about our relationship, especially since I'd been more distracted than usual with a hostile takeover attempt against one of our competitor networks. We were having dinner at Sapphire's, the nicest restaurant in Millbrook, which wasn't saying much, but Ethan had insisted on making reservations somewhere special. He'd been fidgeting with his napkin throughout the entire meal, barely touching his salmon while I tried to keep the conversation light despite the 3 urgent texts from my head of acquisitions burning a hole in my phone. Vivienne, he said suddenly, interrupting my story about one of my students' latest art project disaster. I need to tell you something. My heart stopped. This was it, he'd discovered the truth somehow. Maybe he'd seen one of my encrypted phones, or noticed the high-end security system I'd had installed in my modest apartment, or wondered why I never seemed to worry about money despite my teacher's salary. I know we've only been together 8 months, he continued, his hands visibly shaking as he reached into his jacket pocket. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He dropped to one knee right there in the restaurant, pulling out a small velvet box that probably cost him 3 months of photography income. The entire dining room went silent, phones appeared to capture the moment, and I realized with a mixture of relief and terror that this wasn't about my secret, this was about our future. Vivienne Montgomery, he said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. You've made me believe in love stories again. You've shown me that the most beautiful moments aren't the ones you plan for, they're the ones that happen when you're brave enough to be yourself with someone who sees you completely. The irony of his words hit me like a physical blow. He thought he saw me completely, but he'd never seen me at all. He was proposing to a carefully crafted persona, not to the woman who was secretly orchestrating media coverage of international conflicts and approving budgets that could fund small countries. I know I can't give you everything you deserve, right? Now, he continued, opening the box to reveal a vintage emerald ring that was absolutely perfect in its understated elegance. But I promise to spend every day trying to become the man worthy of your love. Will you marry me? The restaurant was dead silent. Dozens of strangers were watching this intimate moment, their phones recording what they thought was a spontaneous, beautiful proposal. What they couldn't see was the internal war raging inside me, the voice screaming that I should tell him the truth right now, before this went any further, and the desperate part of my heart that wanted this fairy tale more than I'd ever wanted anything. Yes, I whispered, and then louder, yes, of course, yes. The restaurant erupted in applause. Ethan slipped the ring onto my finger with tears in his eyes, and I kissed him like my life depended on it, because in that moment, it felt like it did. This life we'd built together, this version of myself that existed only in his presence, it was the most real thing I'd ever experienced, even though it was built on lies. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding planning and congratulations from our friends in Millbrook. Ethan's photography business had been picking up, thanks to my secret interventions, so he insisted on paying for the wedding himself, despite my subtle offers to contribute more than my teacher's salary should have allowed. I want to do this right, he told me as we toured venues. I want to give you the wedding you've always dreamed of, even if it's not the most expensive option. We settled on the Willowbrook Gardens, a charming outdoor venue on the outskirts of town with sprawling rose gardens and a gazebo overlooking a small lake. It was intimate, romantic, and absolutely perfect for the small ceremony we both wanted. Ethan booked their most affordable package and put a deposit down with money I knew he'd saved for months to afford, but my family situation required delicate navigation. I couldn't invite my father without revealing my true identity, so I told Ethan that we were still estranged and I preferred to keep the guest list small. The lie came easily now, too easily. I'd become an expert at crafting explanations that sounded plausible while revealing nothing. Instead, I invited Cordelia, my sister, who was the only person who knew about my double life. She flew in from New York under the pretense of being my college roommate and managed to charm everyone at the rehearsal dinner with carefully edited stories about our university days that were actually memories from our childhood at various boarding schools. She's lovely, Ethan told me after meeting Cordelia. I can see where you get your strength from. It's wonderful that you have someone who's been there for you through everything. If only he knew that everything included hostile takeovers, congressional testimony about media responsibility, and emergency board meetings during natural disasters to coordinate our network's crisis coverage. The wedding itself was everything I'd dreamed of and nothing like the elaborate society affairs I'd attended my entire life. There were 53 guests total, Ethan's family and friends, my carefully curated fictional support system, and a handful of colleagues from Maplewood Elementary who thought they knew me well. Ethan's mother, Patricia, had taken me under her wing immediately after the engagement, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. She was a retired kindergarten teacher with laugh lines around her eyes and an endless supply of embarrassing stories about Ethan's childhood photography phase when he insisted on documenting every meal. He's been waiting his whole life for someone like you, she told me while helping me into my dress on the morning of the wedding. I've never seen him this happy, this settled. You've given him something he didn't even know he was missing. The guilt was overwhelming. This wonderful woman was welcoming me into her family based on a complete fabrication. When she talked about our future children and family holidays, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to compose myself. Ethan's best man, his college roommate Daniel, gave a speech about how Ethan had been hopelessly romantic but perpetually unlucky in love until he met me. Vivienne, he said, raising his glass, thank you for proving to all of us that fairy tales do exist. Watching you two together gives the rest of us hope that true love is still possible. More irony. More lies wrapped in beautiful sentiment, but when Ethan and I exchanged vows under the gazebo at sunset, with golden light filtering through the trees and our families watching with tears in their eyes, everything else faded away. His promises to love, honor, and cherish me felt more real than any contract I'd ever signed. My promises to support his dreams and build a life together felt like the most important commitment I'd ever made. I love you, Vivienne Montgomery. He whispered as we danced our first dance to an acoustic guitar version of At Last. I love your kindness, your strength, your beautiful heart. I love the way you see magic in ordinary moments and make everything around you better just by being yourself. I love you too, I thought, even though you don't know who I really am. I love you more than I've ever loved anything, which is why I'm going to keep lying to you every single day for the rest of our lives. Our honeymoon was supposed to be a long weekend at a bed and breakfast in the Adirondacks, something modest and romantic that fit our carefully maintained budget. But 3 days before the wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. If only he knew that everything included hostile takeovers, congressional testimony about media responsibility, and emergency board meetings during natural disasters to coordinate our network's crisis coverage. The wedding itself was everything I'd dreamed of and nothing like the elaborate society affairs I'd attended my entire life. There were 53 guests total, Ethan's family and friends, my carefully curated fictional support system, and a handful of colleagues from Maplewood Elementary who thought they knew me well. Ethan's mother, Patricia, had taken me under her wing immediately after the engagement, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. She was a retired kindergarten teacher with laugh lines around her eyes and an endless supply of embarrassing stories about Ethan's childhood photography phase when he insisted on documenting every meal. He's been waiting his whole life for someone like you, she told me while helping me into my dress on the morning of the wedding. I've never seen him this happy, this settled. You've given him something he didn't even know he was missing. The guilt was overwhelming. This wonderful woman was welcoming me into her family based on a complete fabrication. When she talked about our future children and family holidays, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to compose myself. Ethan's best man, his college roommate Daniel, gave a speech about how Ethan had been hopelessly romantic but perpetually unlucky in love until he met me. Vivienne, he said, raising his glass, thank you for proving to all of us that fairy tales do exist. Watching you two together gives the rest of us hope that true love is still possible. More irony. More lies wrapped in beautiful sentiment, but when Ethan and I exchanged vows under the gazebo at sunset, with golden light filtering through the trees and our families watching with tears in their eyes, everything else faded away. His promises to love, honor, and cherish me felt more real than any contract I'd ever signed. My promises to support his dreams and build a life together felt like the most important commitment I'd ever made. I love you, Vivienne Montgomery. He whispered as we danced our first dance to an acoustic guitar version of At Last. I love your kindness, your strength, your beautiful heart. I love the way you see magic in ordinary moments and make everything around you better just by being yourself. I love you too, I thought, even though you don't know who I really am. I love you more than I've ever loved anything, which is why I'm going to keep lying to you every single day for the rest of our lives. Our honeymoon was supposed to be a long weekend at a bed and breakfast in the Adirondacks, something modest and romantic that fit our carefully maintained budget. But 3 days before the wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. I upgraded our reservation. I told myself it was a small thing, just switching to a better room at a nicer resort. Ethan deserved to be spoiled for once, and I could afford to give him a perfect honeymoon without him ever knowing the real source of the upgrade. It seemed like such a harmless lie at the time. I had no idea that this one small deception would be the thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything we built together and destroy the only real love I'd ever known. The upgrade I arranged wasn't just switching to a better room, it was moving us from the modest Pinebrook into the exclusive Meridian Resort and Spa, a luxury destination that normally required a 6-month waiting list and cost more per night than most people made in a month. But when you own the media conglomerate that handles their national advertising campaigns, certain accommodations can be made with a single phone call. That I justified it to myself in a dozen different ways. We were newlyweds, and this was our honeymoon. Shouldn't it be perfect? Ethan had worked so hard building his photography business, often going without basic necessities to invest in equipment. He deserved to experience luxury for once, even if he could never know where it really came from. Most importantly, I wanted to give him something beautiful, something that would make him feel as special as he made me feel every single day. The plan was simple. I would tell him I'd won a contest through the school district, some fabricated Teacher of the Year prize that included a complimentary upgrade to a luxury resort. It wasn't even that far from the truth. I had been named Millbrook Elementary's Teacher of the Year, largely because I'd donated anonymous funds for new classroom technology and supplies that made my classes unusually well-equipped. What I didn't anticipate was how the lie would snowball, or how my own world would collide with the carefully constructed bubble I'd created around our relationship. The Meridian Resort was owned by Blackstone Hospitality Group, one of our major advertising clients. They spent approximately $12 million annually across our media platforms, promoting their chain of luxury properties to affluent travelers. As one of their most important media partners, I was automatically flagged as a VIP guest the moment the reservation was made under my real name, Vivienne Ashford. For billing purposes, I should have used my fake identity for the entire booking. But the financial systems required my actual credit card, which was linked to my real name and corporate accounts. I thought I could manage the discrepancy if it came up, maybe claim there had been some administrative mix-up with names. I'd become so confident in my ability to juggle my double life that I underestimated how quickly things could spiral out of control. The problem started before we even arrived. Marcus Whitmore, the resort's general manager, was someone I'd met several times during advertising strategy meetings. He was an ambitious hospitality executive who'd been trying to arrange a personal meeting with me for months, hoping to discuss expanding our partnership to include their new international properties. When he saw my name on the VIP guest list, he immediately began planning what he assumed would be a business meeting disguised as a social encounter. Meanwhile, I was lying to Ethan about our destination right up until we pulled into the circular drive lined with palm trees and marble fountains. "This can't be right," Ethan said, staring up at the resort's imposing glass and steel architecture. "Vivienne, this place looks like it costs $1,000 a night." "It's probably just fancy looking," I said weakly, my stomach churning, as I recognized the distinctive logo I'd approved for their rebranding campaign 6 months earlier. You know how these places are all about appearance. But as we walked through the soaring lobby with its crystal chandeliers and imported Italian marble floors, I could see Ethan's discomfort growing. The other guests were clearly wealthy, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, the kind of understated luxury that only comes with generational money. We looked distinctly out of place, him in his best khakis and button-down shirt, me in a simple sundress I'd bought specifically to maintain my modest teacher appearance. "Ma'am, sir, welcome to the Meridian Resort," said the desk clerk with the practiced enthusiasm of someone trained to handle VIP guests. "We have you in the presidential suite as requested, with complimentary champagne service and access to our exclusive spa facilities." Ethan's face went white. Presidential suite? There must be some mistake. We booked the standard package through a teacher contest prize. The clerk looked confused, glancing between us and her computer screen. "I show here that Ms. Ashford is confirmed for a top-tier accommodation with all premium amenities included." "Ms. Ashford?" Ethan repeated slowly. "The reservation is under Montgomery." Vivienne Montgomery. This was the moment everything started to unravel, though I didn't realize it yet. I quickly stepped forward, forcing a laugh that sounded strained, even to my own ears. "Oh, there must be some computer glitch," I said. My maiden name was Ashford, maybe it got mixed up in the system somehow. You know how these automated systems can be. It was a reasonable explanation, but I could see doubt creeping into Ethan's expression. He'd never heard me mention any previous name, and I told him my parents had been estranged since college. Why would their system have my maiden name if I'd cut contact years ago? The clerk, trained to accommodate VIP guests without asking awkward questions, simply smiled and handed us our key cards. "Of course, no problem at all. Please enjoy your stay, and don't hesitate to contact the concierge if you need anything." As we rode the elevator to the top floor, Ethan was unusually quiet. I could practically see the questions forming in his mind, but he seemed to be giving me the benefit of the doubt, trusting that there was a reasonable explanation for the confusion. The presidential suite was spectacular and completely wrong for maintaining my cover. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the ocean, the living room was larger than Ethan's entire apartment, and the bathroom featured a marble-soaking tub that could have doubled as a small swimming pool. Fresh orchids, premium champagne, and a welcome basket filled with gourmet treats worth more than most people's weekly grocery budget completed the scene. "Vivienne," Ethan said quietly, standing in the middle of the opulent space. "What kind of teacher contest comes with accommodations like this?" I was scrambling for an explanation when my phone rang, not my Vivienne Montgomery phone, but my other phone, the encrypted device I used for Ashford Media business. In my nervousness about the check-in situation, I'd forgotten to turn it off. "Sorry. That's probably a parent calling about homework," I said quickly, declining the call, but it rang again immediately. Then again. "Maybe you should answer it," Ethan suggested. "It might be important." The caller ID showed it was Marcus Whitmore, the resort's general manager. He was probably calling to arrange a meeting, completely unaware that I was here incognito with my husband, who had no idea who I really was. "It can wait," I said, turning the phone off entirely, but the damage was done. Ethan had noticed that the phone was different from my usual device, sleeker, more expensive, clearly not the basic smartphone a teacher would carry. He'd also noticed my reaction to seeing the caller, the way I'd gone pale and immediately shut down the device. That evening at dinner in the resort's five-star restaurant, I could feel him watching me differently, studying me. The easy comfort we'd always shared felt strained, replaced by an undercurrent of suspicion that made every conversation feel like navigating a minefield. "The view from our room is incredible," he said over appetizers that cost more than his usual weekly food budget. "I still can't believe this teacher contest exists." "What was it called again?" "The Regional Excellence in Education Award," I improvised, hating how easily the lie came. "It's a new program." "Which organization sponsors it?" "The State Education Foundation." "I should look into entering some of my teacher friends for next year. This kind of recognition could really help their careers." My throat felt tight. "I don't think they're doing it again next year. Budget cuts." Each lie required another lie to support it, creating an increasingly complex web of deception that I was struggling to maintain. And Ethan, with his photographer's eye for detail and his genuine curiosity about the world, was asking exactly the kinds of questions that would expose the inconsistencies. The worst part was that I could see how much he wanted to believe me. Despite his growing doubts, despite the obvious impossibility of the situation, he was trying to trust the woman he'd married just 3 days ago. His love for me was making him ignore his own instincts, and I was exploiting that trust with every word I spoke. As we walked back to our suite after dinner, I caught a glimpse of Marcus Whitmore in the lobby, clearly looking for someone. Our eyes met for just a moment before I quickly turned away, but I could see the recognition in his expression, followed by confusion as he took in my modest appearance and the man beside me who clearly wasn't from our usual social circles. I managed to steer Ethan toward the elevators before Marcus could approach us, but I knew it was only a matter of time before my two worlds collided in a way I couldn't control or explain away. That night, as Ethan slept beside me in the ridiculously luxurious bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and finally acknowledging what I'd been trying to ignore: this couldn't continue. The lies were becoming too complex, the contradictions too obvious. Soon, very soon, I would have to choose between the truth and the life I'd built with the man I loved. I thought I had a few more days to figure out how to handle the revelation. I was wrong. The change in Ethan began the morning after our first night at the Meridian Resort. I woke up to find him sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, fully dressed, staring out at the ocean with a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. The easy intimacy that had defined our relationship since the beginning was replaced by something I'd never seen from him before: calculated distance. "Good morning," I said softly, wrapping my arms around his shoulders from behind. Normally, he would lean into my touch, pull me onto his lap, start our day with kisses and whispered conversations about our plans. Instead, he stiffened slightly under my touch and gave me a smile that looked rehearsed. "Morning, beautiful," he said, but the endearment felt hollow, like he was playing a role rather than expressing genuine affection. "I already ordered room service. Should be here soon." When breakfast arrived, delivered by a server who treated us with the kind of deference reserved for celebrities and billionaires, Ethan was polite but distant. He made small talk about the weather, complimented the food, and suggested activities for the day, but something fundamental had shifted. The man who usually couldn't keep his hands off me, who photographed me constantly because he said I was too beautiful not to capture, barely looked directly at me. "I thought we could explore the resort today," he said, scrolling through his phone instead of making eye contact. "Maybe check out the spa, walk around the grounds." "That sounds perfect," I replied, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice despite the growing knot in my stomach. "We could take some photos together. You always say you don't have enough pictures of us." "Sure," he said absently, not looking up from his screen. "Whatever you want." "Whatever you want." Not "I'd love to" or "that's a great idea" or any of the warm, eager responses I'd grown accustomed to. Just polite acquiescence, as if he were humoring a stranger rather than spending time with his new wife. As we walked through the resort's meticulously landscaped gardens, I tried to recapture our usual dynamic. I pointed out interesting architectural details, made jokes about the absurdly ornate fountain sculptures, and attempted to engage him in the kind of playful conversation that had always come so naturally to us. But Ethan responded to everything with polite interest rather than genuine engagement, like a tour guide going through the motions with a client he didn't particularly like. The breaking point came when we passed the resort's business center. Through the glass windows, I could see Marcus Whitmore conducting what appeared to be a staff meeting. He looked up at exactly the wrong moment, made eye contact with me, and immediately excused himself from the meeting to come outside. "Ms. Ashford," he called out, approaching us with the kind of eager professionalism that high-end hospitality managers perfect. "What a wonderful surprise to see you here. I hope you're enjoying your stay." I felt Ethan go rigid beside me. "Ms. Ashford." Again. The same name that had appeared on our reservation, the same name I'd claimed was just a computer glitch. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, "I think you have me confused with someone else. My name is Vivienne Montgomery." Marcus looked genuinely puzzled, glancing between Ethan and me with the expression of someone trying to solve a difficult puzzle. "Oh, I apologize. You look remarkably similar to one of our valued business partners." "My mistake." But the damage was done. As Marcus walked away, I could see Ethan's mind working, connecting dots I desperately didn't want him to connect. "Funny. Coincidence, he said quietly as we continued walking. First the computer system has you as Ashford, now a complete stranger thinks you're someone else named Ashford. That's quite a mix-up. People make mistakes, I said weakly. You know how it is. Do I? He asked, and for the first time since the night before, he looked directly at me. Do I know how it is, Vivienne? Because I'm starting to think I don't know much of anything. The rest of the day passed in increasingly uncomfortable silence. Ethan went through the motions of honeymoon activities. We had couples massages at the spa, lounged by the pool, attended a wine tasting in the resort's private vineyard, but he might as well have been a million miles away. Every interaction felt forced, every smile looked practiced, and the warm, genuine man I'd fallen in love with was replaced by someone who felt like a polite stranger. That evening, during dinner at the resort's most exclusive restaurant, I tried one last time to bridge the growing gap between us. Ethan, I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. Talk to me. What's wrong? I can tell something's bothering you. He didn't pull his hand away, but he didn't squeeze mine back either. Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect. This place is amazing, the food is incredible, and I'm here with my beautiful wife. What more could I want? The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. There was a bitter edge to his voice that I'd never heard before, a sarcasm that felt like a slap across the face. You don't sound like you mean that. Don't I? He finally looked at me directly, and what I saw in his eyes made my breath catch. It wasn't anger or hurt or even confusion. It was calculation. Maybe I'm just overwhelmed by all this luxury. It's a lot to take in for someone like me. Someone like me. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I didn't want to explore. What do you mean, someone like you? You know, he said, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than he usually spent on groceries in a week. A small-town photographer who worries about paying rent. Someone who saves for months to afford a nice dinner out. Someone who thought he was marrying an elementary school teacher, not. He gestured around the opulent restaurant. Not someone who apparently wins contests that come with presidential suites at 5-star resorts. My throat felt like it was closing. Ethan, I can explain, can you? He interrupted, leaning back in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Because I've been trying to make sense of things all day, and the explanations keep getting more creative. The accusation in his voice was unmistakable. He didn't believe me anymore. Worse than that, he was starting to piece together that I'd been lying to him, even if he didn't yet understand the scope of those lies. I love you, I said desperately. Whatever you're thinking, whatever doubts you're having, that hasn't changed. I love you more than anything. Do you? He asked quietly. Because love is supposed to be built on trust, isn't it? On honesty? On actually knowing who the person is that you're claiming to love? The question hit me like a physical blow because it was exactly what I'd been afraid of since the beginning. How could he love me if he didn't know who I really was? How could I love him if I was lying to him about everything that mattered? You know who I am, I whispered. Do I, Vivienne? He said my name like he was testing it, like he wasn't sure it was even real. Because right now, I'm not sure of anything. We finished dinner in silence, and when we returned to our suite, Ethan immediately went to the bathroom and stayed there for almost an hour. When he came out, he was carrying his phone and had the determined expression of someone who had made a difficult decision. I need to make some calls, he said. Work stuff. You should get some sleep. He spent the rest of the night on the balcony, speaking in low voices to people I couldn't identify. Through the glass doors, I could see him pacing, running his hands through his hair, occasionally stopping to write things down in the small notebook he always carried for photography ideas. When I woke up the next morning, he was already dressed and sitting by the window again, but this time his posture was different. Less confused, more resolved. Like someone who had found answers to questions that had been bothering him. "Good morning," I said tentatively. "Morning," he replied without looking at me. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About the contest, the upgrade, all of it." "And?" He turned to face me, and what I saw in his expression made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or hurt or even disappointment. It was the look of someone who had discovered they'd been played, and who was now deciding what to do about it. "I think," he said carefully, "that there are some things we need to discuss. Some questions that need answers." "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ask me anything." "Anything?" He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made me want to run. "Good. Because I have a lot of questions, Vivienne. Starting with who you really are." I never got the chance to answer his questions. While I was in the shower that morning, steeling myself for a conversation that would either save or destroy our marriage, Ethan was packing our bags and planning his escape. When I emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, hair still damp and wrapped in the resort's plush terry cloth robe, I found our suite eerily quiet. No sound of Ethan moving around, no coffee brewing, no morning news playing softly on the television like there had been every day of our relationship. "Ethan?" I called out, walking into the main living area. "Did you order room service?" Silence. Our luggage was gone. Both suitcases, his camera bag, even the small overnight case where I kept my makeup and jewelry. The welcome basket that had been sitting on the coffee table was untouched, but every trace of our personal belongings had vanished as if we'd never been there at all. On the marble dining table, weighted down by a crystal paperweight that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, was a single sheet of resort letterhead with Ethan's careful handwriting across the middle. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. "Vivienne, if that's even your real name, I know who you are now. I know about Ashford Media. I know about the billions of dollars. I know about the lies. I can't do this. I can't be married to someone who built our entire relationship on deception. I thought I knew you, but you're a complete stranger to me. I've taken your belongings to the front desk. The concierge has your passport and wallet. I couldn't bring myself to leave you stranded, even though you left me emotionally stranded the moment you decided I wasn't worth your honesty. Don't try to contact me. Don't try to explain. There's nothing you could say that would make this right. I'm sorry for both of us. I read the note 3 times before the words fully penetrated. He knew. Somehow, overnight, he had discovered everything I'd spent 9 months hiding from him. The media empire, the money, the power, all of it. But more than that, he was gone. Not just physically absent, but completely, definitively gone from my life. My legs gave out and I sank into one of the suite's leather armchairs, still clutching the note. 4 days. We'd been married for exactly 4 days, and he decided that our entire relationship was a lie not worth salvaging. The worst part wasn't his anger. I could have understood anger. It wasn't even his hurt, though that would have been devastating enough. It was his coldness. The clinical way he'd written the note, the efficient manner in which he'd removed every trace of our shared presence, the complete absence of any indication that leaving me had caused him pain. I called the front desk with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "This is Ms. Ashford in the presidential suite," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My husband said he left some items for me?" "Yes, ma'am," came the professionally sympathetic response. "Mr. Reeves checked out this morning and left instructions for us to hold your personal belongings. He also settled the bill for your entire stay and requested that we arrange transportation for you whenever you're ready to depart. Settled the bill. With what money? Ethan's photography business was successful enough to cover his modest lifestyle, but a 4-night stay in the presidential suite at the Meridian Resort would have cost him several months of income. Unless, what form of payment did he use? I asked. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't share specific financial information. However, Mr. Reeves did mention that he had recently received payment for a very large project. A very large project. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. While I'd been secretly orchestrating his professional success through my media connections, someone else had been watching, someone else had been asking questions. And when that someone discovered the truth about our relationship, they'd offered Ethan a way out that came with financial compensation. I spent the next hour on the phone with Cordelia, my sister, who was the only person who knew about my double life and could help me understand what had happened. Vivienne, slow down, she said after I'd breathlessly explained the situation. Start from the beginning. How could he have found out? You've been so careful. I don't know, I said, pacing the suite's living room in my robe. Yesterday he was suspicious but confused. This morning he knew everything. Someone told him, Cordelia. Someone who knew exactly how to hurt me the most. Who would do that? Who even knows about your arrangement with Ethan? That's when it hit me. Marcus Whitmore. The resort manager who had recognized me yesterday, who had access to our reservation information, who had seen me with Ethan and witnessed the obvious disconnect between my claimed identity and the VIP treatment we were receiving. I need you to make some calls, I told Cordelia. Find out everything you can about Marcus Whitmore, general manager at the Meridian Resort. Check his connections to our competitors, to anyone who might benefit from damaging information about the Ashford family. While Cordelia worked her contacts, I forced myself to shower and dress, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity even as my world collapsed around me. When I went to the front desk to collect my belongings, the staff treated me with the same professional courtesy they'd shown since our arrival, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. Word had clearly spread that there had been some kind of domestic drama in the presidential suite. My passport and wallet were returned to me in a sealed envelope, along with a small box that contained my wedding ring. Ethan had apparently removed it from my jewelry case and packaged it separately, as if he wanted to make sure I understood that our marriage was over. The ring looked so small and insignificant in its little box, just a vintage emerald that had cost him months of savings, and represented everything he thought our future would be. Now it felt like evidence of my own capacity for self-deception. How had I convinced myself that love built on lies could ever last? Cordelia called back as I was sitting in the resort's lobby, trying to work up the courage to arrange transportation back to Millbrook. I found him, she said without preamble. Marcus Whitmore. He's been feeding information to Preston Blake at Meridian Broadcasting. Preston Blake. The name hit me like a physical blow. Preston was the CEO of our biggest competitor, a man who had been trying to damage Ashford Media's reputation for years through a combination of corporate espionage and personal attacks. If he had discovered my relationship with Ethan, he would have seen it as the perfect opportunity to destabilize me both professionally and personally. What kind of information? I asked. Pictures, mostly. Someone's been documenting your life in Millbrook for months. Photos of you and Ethan together, records of your teaching job, evidence of your double identity. Preston apparently approached Ethan yesterday morning with a complete dossier on your real life and a very generous offer for exclusive rights to the story of how Ashford Media's CEO had been living a lie. The betrayal was complete now. Not only had Ethan discovered my deception, but he'd been offered money to expose it publicly. The man who had promised to love and cherish me 4 days ago had sold our story to my worst enemy for what was probably more money than he'd ever seen in his life. There's more, Cordelia continued. Preston's planning to run the story next week. Media Heiress's marriage fraud is the working headline. They're positioning it as a story about corporate ethics and authenticity, questioning whether someone who lies about their personal life can be trusted to run a media empire. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of what I had lost settling over me like a suffocating blanket. My marriage, my privacy, my professional reputation, my ability to ever trust anyone again, all of it gone because I had wanted, just once, to be loved for who I was rather than what I owned. But as I sat there in that opulent lobby, surrounded by the luxury that had always been my birthright but had ultimately cost me everything that mattered, I felt something unexpected rising inside me alongside the grief and humiliation, anger, pure, focused, absolutely ruthless anger. Ethan had every right to be hurt by my deception. He had every right to leave me, to decide that our marriage couldn't survive the foundation of lies I'd built it on. But he did not have the right to sell our story, to profit from my pain, to hand my enemies the weapons they needed to destroy everything my family had built. He had chosen to see me as a stranger, as someone whose feelings didn't matter, as a source of income rather than a woman who had loved him with every fiber of her being. Now he was going to discover what it really meant to be on the wrong side of Vivienne Ashford. The war was about to begin. And I was no longer the victim. The drive back to Millbrook gave me 3 hours to transform from a heartbroken, abandoned wife into Vivienne Ashford, CEO of a media empire with resources that Ethan and Preston Blake couldn't even comprehend. By the time my private car pulled into the driveway of my modest rental house, the house where Ethan and I had planned to start our life together, I had made 17 phone calls and set in motion a response that would reshape the landscape of everything they thought they understood about power. The first call was to Diana Chin, my head of corporate intelligence and the closest thing I had to a best friend in the business world. Diana had been with Ashford Media for 8 years, working her way up from junior analyst to running our most sensitive operations. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and completely loyal to our family. "Vivienne," she said, answering on the first ring despite it being barely 7 a.m. on the West Coast. Cordelia filled me in. "How are you holding up?" "I'm done being a victim," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I need everything you can find on Preston Blake's operation, going back 5 years. Financial records, employee communications, every dirty secret they've been trying to hide. I also need a complete background check on Ethan Reeves, real background, not the surface information I thought I knew." "Already in progress," Diana replied. I started the Blake investigation the moment Cordelia called. "As for your husband, Vivienne, there are some things you need to know." "Tell me." "Ethan's photography business hasn't been as successful as he led you to believe. He's been struggling financially for months, late rent payments, mounting credit card debt, equipment purchased on payment plans he can barely afford. The lucky breaks he's been getting, the magazine features, the sudden influx of clients, those weren't just because of your interventions." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "Someone else has been funding his success, providing him with opportunities and financial backing. We're still tracing the money, but the timing corresponds exactly with when Preston Blake's interest in you intensified." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "How long?" "At least 3 months, possibly longer." "Vivienne, I think they've been planning this for a while. The wedding, the honeymoon upgrade, your discovery, none of it was accidental." I sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the reality that my relationship with Ethan might have been orchestrated from the beginning. Not just built on my lies, but potentially founded on his as well. "I want financial records for every payment he's received in the past 6 months, I said finally. "I want to know exactly how much they paid him for my heart." The second wave of calls went to our legal team. Benjamin Torres, our chief counsel, had been handling hostile corporate attacks for 20 years and had never lost a case that mattered to our family. "Benjamin, I need you to prepare for war," I said without preamble. "Preston Blake is planning to run a story about my personal life next week. I want every legal option on the table: privacy violations, corporate espionage, extortion, whatever we can make stick." "Vivienne, you know media law better than most," Benjamin replied carefully. "If the information was obtained legally and the story is substantially true, our options are limited." Unless what? "Unless we can prove that Blake obtained the information through illegal means or that he's using it as part of a broader campaign of corporate harassment. If we can establish a pattern of targeted attacks designed to damage Ashford Media's business interests, we might have grounds for a racketeering case." "Then find that pattern. I want every story Blake's organization has run about our company in the past 5 years analyzed for source material and accuracy. I want every employee who's left our company to work for him investigated for potential theft of proprietary information." The third round of calls activated resources that most people didn't even know existed. Ashford Media's influence extended far beyond our official holdings. We had relationships with technology companies, political figures, financial institutions, and information brokers who could make problems disappear or create new ones depending on our needs. "Sarah," I said when my contact at Blackstone Technologies answered, "I need a favor. How quickly can you audit every digital device associated with Meridian Broadcasting's senior staff?" "Looking for anything specific?" Sarah asked. The question was purely professional. She'd done work for us before and knew better than to ask about motivations. Evidence of corporate espionage, illegal surveillance, anything that might violate federal communications law. "I'm particularly interested in any monitoring of private citizens who aren't public figures." 48 hours, she said. "Maybe less if you authorize the premium package." Authorized. "Send the bills to Diana Chin." While I waited for the information to flow in, I did something I hadn't done in months. I walked through my real life. Not the modest teacher's apartment I'd maintained for Ethan's benefit, but my actual home, a sprawling estate 40 miles outside Millbrook that housed my private office, my art collection, and the control center where I actually ran Ashford Media's day-to-day operations. The house felt foreign after months of living in my carefully constructed fantasy. Security guards nodded respectfully as I passed, household staff appeared and disappeared efficiently, and everything operated with the precise choreography of an organization built around serious money and power. This was the world Ethan had rejected without ever seeing it, the life he decided wasn't worth the complexity of loving someone who inhabited it.in my private office, surrounded by monitors displaying real-time data from our media properties around the world. I began to see the scope of what Blake had been planning. Diana's preliminary report showed a sophisticated intelligence operation that had been tracking my movements, photographing my interactions with Ethan, and building a detailed profile of my double life for months, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that discovering my deception would destroy me personally and professionally. They had counted on me being too humiliated, too heartbroken, too damaged by Ethan's betrayal to mount an effective response. They had no idea who they were dealing with, the woman who had fallen in love with a small-town photographer, who had dreamed of a simple life built on genuine connection, was gone. In her place stood someone who had inherited not just wealth, but the accumulated power and influence of 3 generations of media dominance. Diana called back at sunset with preliminary findings that confirmed my worst suspicions and provided the ammunition I needed for what came next. "Preston Blake's operation is more extensive than we initially thought," she said. "They've been running similar intelligence operations on at least 6 other media executives, gathering compromising information for strategic use. The Ethan situation isn't personal, it's part of a broader corporate warfare campaign." "Evidence?" financial records showing payments to private investigators, communications between Blake and his intelligence team discussing asset development and deployment, and most importantly, recorded conversations where Blake explicitly discusses using personal information to damage competitors' reputations and stock prices. How did you get recorded conversations? Blake's head of security is someone we placed there 2 years ago during the Peterson merger. He's been collecting insurance material ever since. I smiled for the first time since reading Ethan's goodbye note. Perfect. What about Ethan's financial records? 3 payments totaling $480,000 over the past 4 months. The money was laundered through a photography equipment company that Blake owns, making it look like legitimate business payments. The final payment of $200,000 was transferred yesterday morning, just hours before he left you. So there it was. The exact price of my marriage, $480,000. Less than I spent on quarterly bonuses for my executive assistants, but apparently enough to convince the man I loved to destroy our life together. Diana, I said quietly, I want you to prepare a comprehensive response plan. Not just defensive, offensive. If Preston Blake wants to play with people's lives for profit, he's about to learn what that feels like when someone with real power decides to play back. What level of response are we talking about? I looked out the window of my office at the sprawling grounds of my estate, at the world I had hidden from Ethan because I thought he might love me more if he didn't know the scope of what I controlled. He had chosen to see that love as a lie. Worth selling. Now he would see what truth looked like when it was wielded as a weapon. Total war, I said. I want Blake's empire dismantled piece by piece. I want every business relationship he has questioned, every financial arrangement scrutinized, every secret he's been hiding exposed. And I want Ethan to watch it happen, knowing that his betrayal was the catalyst for everything that follows. Understood. How do you want to handle the immediate media threat? We're not going to deny the story or try to suppress it, I said, surprising her. We're going to own it. By the time I'm done, Ethan and Blake will wish they had never heard the name Vivienne Ashford. The war was about to begin, and I wasn't just going to win, I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had lost when they decided to bet against me. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Ethan had abandoned me at the resort. Call number 255 on my phone log, not that I was counting, except I absolutely was. I had been awake for hours, sitting in my real office surrounded by financial reports and legal documents that would destroy Preston Blake's empire, when Ethan's name appeared on my screen for the first time since he'd walked out of our marriage. I let it ring. He called again immediately. Then again. By the 4th call, I realized he wasn't going to stop, and my curiosity about what could have driven him to such desperation finally overcame my anger. What do you want, Ethan? I answered on the 7th ring, my voice perfectly steady. Vivienne, thank God you answered. His voice was frantic, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. I need to talk to you. I need to explain. You need to explain? I interrupted. You need to explain taking $480,000 to sell our marriage to my competitors? You need to explain abandoning your wife in a hotel room with a note? Which part requires explanation, exactly? The silence on the other end lasted exactly 15 seconds. You know about the money. I know about everything, Ethan. Every payment. Every meeting with Preston Blake, every lie you told me while you were building a case against me. The only thing I don't understand is why you're calling me now. Because I made a mistake. His voice cracked. The biggest mistake of my life. Vivienne, please, I need to see you. I need to make this right. I looked out the window of my office at the sunrise breaking over my estate's private lake, at the world I'd built while he was trying to tear it down. Make it right? You sold my life story to tabloid journalists and disappeared in the middle of the night. What exactly do you think you can make right? Everything. I can fix everything. I know who you really are now, and I don't care about the money or the lies or any of it. I love you, Vivienne. I love you, and I was an idiot to let fear make me run away. Fear. He thought this was about fear. He had no idea what was coming. Where are you? I asked. Millbrook. I'm at Rosie's Café, the place where we had our first date. I've been here since yesterday, waiting, hoping you'd come home eventually. Rosie's Café. Of course he would choose the most sentimental location possible, the place where our love story had begun, thinking that nostalgia might soften the blow of what he'd done. He still didn't understand that the woman who had fallen in love with him over cinnamon rolls and terrible coffee no longer existed. I'll be there in an hour, I said, and hung up before he could respond. I dressed carefully for what I knew would be our final conversation. Not in the modest teacher clothes that Vivienne Montgomery would have worn, but in a tailored black suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, paired with the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, the woman who had taught me that power without the will to use it was just expensive decoration. Diana met me in the cafe parking lot, carrying a manila folder thick with evidence and a tablet displaying real-time updates on the systematic destruction of Preston Blake's business empire that had begun at midnight. Status report, I said as we walked toward the cafe entrance. Blake's primary investors pulled out 2 hours ago after our leaked recordings hit the financial news networks, Diana reported. His stock price has dropped 43% since markets opened. The FBI raided his offices an hour ago based on the corporate espionage evidence we provided. And our friends at the IRS are conducting a surprise audit of all his shell companies. And Ethan? He's been trying to contact Blake since yesterday. Blake won't take his calls. Apparently, when the FBI showed up, Blake threw him under the bus immediately, claiming Ethan was a rogue asset who exceeded his authority. I smiled grimly. Honor among thieves had always been a myth. Through the cafe's front window, I could see Ethan sitting at the same corner table where we'd shared our first date. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, wearing wrinkled clothes that suggested he'd been wearing them for days. 2 empty coffee cups sat in front of him, and he was checking his phone obsessively, probably trying to reach Blake or monitoring the news coverage of his patron's spectacular downfall. The cafe was nearly empty. At this early hour, just a few regulars reading newspapers and drinking coffee. Perfect for a private conversation that would end a marriage and possibly destroy what remained of his life. Remember, I told Diana as we entered, record everything. I want a complete record of this conversation for our legal files. Ethan looked up as we approached, his face lighting up with relief and hope that I knew was about to be completely extinguished. He started to stand, probably planning to embrace me, but stopped when he saw my expression and the woman beside me carrying official-looking documents. Vivienne, he said softly. You came. You said you had something to explain, I replied, sliding into the seat across from him while Diana positioned herself at the adjacent table, close enough to record but far enough away to maintain the illusion of privacy. I'm listening. First, I need you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen, he began, his words tumbling out in a rush. When Blake approached me, I thought he was just a journalist working on a story about successful small-town businesses. The photography spreads, the equipment sponsorship deal, the magazine features, I thought I was finally getting the recognition I deserved. When did you know? I asked. Know what? When did you know that I was Vivienne Ashford, not Vivienne Montgomery? When did you know that your wife was the CEO of a media empire? He looked down at his hands. The night before I left. Blake showed me everything: photos of your real house, financial records, board meeting minutes with your signature. He had been documenting your double life for months. And instead of talking to me about it, instead of asking for the truth, you decided to take his money and run. I was scared, he said desperately. I was terrified that everything we had was fake, that you had been playing some kind of elaborate game with me. Blake said that billionaires like you collect people like me as trophies, that you probably had a dozen other projects in different cities. So you believed a stranger over your wife. I was wrong. I know that now. Vivienne, I've been watching the news coverage of Blake's company, and I know what you're doing to him. I know what kind of power you really have. And I know that if you wanted to destroy me, you could do it without breaking a sweat. He was right about that. Diana's preliminary report had identified 17 different ways we could eliminate his photography business, damage his professional reputation, and ensure he never worked in media again. But what he still didn't understand was that I had no intention of merely destroying his career. Blake's company is finished, I said matter-of-factly. His investors are gone, his assets are frozen, and he's facing federal charges for corporate espionage. By this time tomorrow, Meridian Broadcasting will cease to exist as a business entity. Ethan's face went pale. What about the story? The exposé about your double life? Oh, that story is still running, I said with a smile that made him flinch. In fact, it's the lead story on every major news network this morning. But the narrative isn't quite what Blake planned. I nodded to Diana, who placed her tablet on the table and turned it so Ethan could see the screen. The headline read, Media. Heiress exposes corporate espionage ring, how one woman's search for love uncovered systematic industry corruption. The story isn't about my deception, I continued as Ethan stared at the screen in growing horror. It's about yours. About how a small-town photographer was recruited by corporate criminals to seduce and betray a media executive for money. About how you took nearly $500,000 to destroy a marriage and deliver sensitive information to my competitors. That's not. I didn't seduce you. I loved you. Did you? I asked quietly. Because according to financial records, you received your first payment from Blake 3 weeks before we met. Diana, tell him about the photography assignment. Diana consulted her notes. The Riverside Gallery opening where you first encountered Ms. Ashford wasn't a random networking opportunity. Blake's people had discovered her identity and her presence at local cultural events. You were specifically hired to attend that opening and make contact with her. The devastation on Ethan's face was complete now. He looked like a man watching his entire understanding of reality collapse. No. That's not. I didn't know who she was when I met her. I thought she was just a teacher. But you knew you were being paid to meet someone specific that night, I said. You knew you were working for Blake, even if you didn't know the full scope of the assignment. I thought it was just a networking opportunity. He said he might have magazine work for me if I could connect with the right people at cultural events. And the equipment upgrades? The magazine features? The sudden influx of clients that coincidentally started right after you began dating me? I thought I was finally getting lucky. I thought my talent was being recognized. I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I had loved more than anything in the world, the man who had been a paid actor in his own relationship from the very beginning. What's interesting, Ethan, is that you're still lying. Even now, even after being caught. You're still trying to minimize your role in this. I'm not lying. I love you, Vivienne. Whatever Blake paid me, whatever I did wrong, that doesn't change the fact that I fell in love with you." "You fell in love with a woman who didn't exist," I said quietly. "And you sold information about a woman you never bothered to understand. But here's what's going to happen now." I stood up, straightening my jacket and picking up my purse. "You're going to live with the consequences of your choices. Blake is finished, but his crimes will be public knowledge forever. Your name is attached to this story permanently. Every time someone searches for you online, they'll find articles about the photographer who was paid to seduce and betray a media heiress." "Vivienne, please, I'm not Vivienne to you anymore," I said. "I'm Ms. Ashford. And you're someone who made the mistake of betting against me." I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. "Oh, and Ethan? The $480,000 Blake paid. You? The IRS will be very interested in how you reported that income on your tax returns. I hope you kept good records." As I left him sitting in the ruins of his life, surrounded by the ghost of our first date and the reality of what his greed had cost him, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not satisfaction or revenge or even closure, but simple relief. That the woman who had been foolish enough to love him was finally, completely dead. 6 months after that final confrontation at Rosie's Café, I was sitting in my real office, not the modest teacher's apartment I'd maintained for a lie, but the glass-walled corner suite on the 52nd floor of the Ashford Tower in Manhattan, when Diana brought me the final reports on what the media had dubbed the Millbrook deception. Preston Blake was serving 18 months in federal prison for corporate espionage and racketeering. Meridian Broadcasting had been sold off in pieces to cover his legal debts, with most of the assets acquired by Ashford Media at bankruptcy. Auction prices. The irony wasn't lost on me that Blake's attempt to destroy my empire had resulted in me expanding it with his own company's remains. Ethan's story was more complicated and, I had to admit, more satisfying in its poetic justice. The IRS investigation concluded last week, Diana reported, settling into the chair across from my desk with a tablet full of updates. He owed $127,000 in back taxes on the Blake payments, plus penalties and interest. His photography studio was seized to cover the debt. And his reputation? Completely destroyed. The story went viral on social media. Photographer paid $500,000 to seduce media heiress was trending for 3 weeks. He's been blacklisted by every major publication and advertising agency. Most of his local clients canceled their contracts when the story broke. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been regret if I'd allowed myself to feel it. What's he doing for work now? Last report had him working at a camera store in Albany. Minimum wage, no benefits. He's also facing multiple civil lawsuits from clients who claim his association with corporate espionage damaged their business reputations. The man who had once photographed celebrities and tech moguls was now selling camera batteries to tourists. The man who had promised to love and cherish me had learned exactly what it cost to bet against someone with real power, but the most important transformation hadn't been Ethan's fall or Blake's imprisonment, it had been my own evolution from someone who apologized for her strength into someone who wielded it without hesitation. The public story of my double life had indeed made headlines for weeks, but not in the way Blake had planned. Instead of portraying me as a deceptive heiress who had manipulated an innocent man, the narrative became one of corporate espionage, with me as both the target and the ultimate victor. The business press praised my strategic response to the attack, while the general media focused on the romantic angle of a woman whose search for authentic love had exposed a criminal conspiracy. Harvard Business School wants to do a case study on your crisis management strategy, Diana continued. They're calling it a masterclass in turning personal attacks into professional advantage. Decline, I said immediately. I have no interest in teaching other people how to survive betrayal. They can figure it out themselves. The truth was, I had no desire to relive those weeks of discovery and planning, even in an academic context. The woman who had graded third-grade math tests while secretly running board meetings felt like a character from someone else's life. A naive person I barely recognized anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Cordelia. "Dinner tonight? You've been working too much again." It was the same text she sent every week, part of her ongoing campaign to ensure I didn't become so consumed by business that I forgot how to be human, but the question of my humanity was more complicated now. The capacity for love that had driven me to create Vivienne Montgomery hadn't disappeared, but it had been tempered by a hard-earned understanding of what happened when you trusted people with the most vulnerable parts of yourself. I had learned to love my power instead of hiding from it. The modest teacher's apartment in Millbrook had been sold months ago, along with the Toyota and the carefully curated wardrobe of someone living on a teacher's salary. I'd kept exactly one item from that life, the sunflower Ethan had given me on our first date, now pressed between the pages of a book I never opened but couldn't bring myself to throw away, not because I missed him, but because I wanted to remember. The cost of believing that love required you to be smaller than you were. The new Vivienne Ashford didn't hide her intelligence in board meetings or pretend her ideas were suggestions rather than directives. She didn't deflect questions about her family's wealth or make excuses for the power she'd inherited and expanded. When potential romantic interests were intimidated by her success, she didn't try to make them feel better about their own insecurities. She simply moved on to people who weren't threatened by competence. "There's something else," Diana said, pulling up another file on her tablet. "We've been monitoring Ethan's communications, and yesterday he attempted to contact someone at Chronicle magazine about writing a tell-all book about your relationship. And Chronicle's editor called me personally to report the contact. Apparently, Ethan wanted to present it as a story about redemption and true love conquering class differences." Diana's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the disdain in her eyes. The editor told him that no one was interested in the opinions of a disgraced photographer who sold out his wife for money. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after losing everything, even after being exposed as a paid actor in his own marriage, Ethan still thought he could profit from our story. He still believed he was the wronged party, the small-town hero who had been deceived by a powerful woman rather than the mercenary who had taken money to destroy a marriage. "Add Chronicle to our preferred media partner list," I said. "Anyone with that much sense deserves our business." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan, watching the city move with the relentless energy that had always matched my own ambitions. Somewhere down there, millions of people were building lives, making choices, trusting the wrong people, learning hard lessons about power and love and the cost of both. That I had learned my lesson thoroughly. "Diana," I said without turning around, "I want you to prepare a comprehensive media strategy for the next quarter. It's time for Ashford Media to expand into new markets." "Which markets are you thinking?" "All of them. Digital media, international broadcasting, social platforms, content creation. I want us to be so powerful, so diversified, so essential to the media landscape that no one will ever again make the mistake of thinking they can use my personal life as a weapon against my professional interests. That's ambitious." I turned back to her with a smile that had nothing to do with warmth and everything to do with the kind of predatory satisfaction that came from understanding exactly how much damage you could inflict when someone underestimated you. "I'm Vivienne Ashford," I said. "Ambitious is what I do." The story of my marriage had ended in betrayal and destruction, but the story of my empire was just beginning. I had learned that the right person would never ask you to be smaller, never require you to hide your strength, never make you choose between love and power. Until I found that person, if such a person existed, I would build something so magnificent, so unassailable, so powerful that it would serve as both monument and warning. This is what happens when you bet against someone who refuses to apologize for winning. The 255 missed calls had stopped weeks ago. Ethan had finally accepted that it was too late. That the woman he thought he could manipulate and abandon no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned that the greatest love story of all was the one you wrote with your own power, your own choices, your own refusal to be diminished by other people's limitations, and I was just getting started. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.